You know, I love to dance. I love to put on a good groove through my body when listening to great music, at least in the privacy of my own home. Oh, that reminds me, I should close the curtains of the manse. I love dancing in my car with my daughters, although they do make fun of this one face that they say I make every single time I dance, which I think is a little bit Depeche Mode and sadly a little bit Muppet, according to them. I've always loved the image of King David dancing with all of his might, before the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, he was dancing before the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant contained what we would call the Ten Commandments, and for King David and the people of the newly formed Israel, the united nation of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant represented the actual presence of their Lord God. And David was dancing the ark toward Jerusalem, where it would be housed forever in his mind and in his hopes and in his dreams. So David, in different stages, taking breaks over a certain amount of months, danced his way to Jerusalem in front of the Lord, in front of the Ark of the Covenant, whirling and twirling, it says, with all of his might. And it lists the instruments, the tambourines, the lyre, the harp, the drums. I imagine a bit of the ecstasy that we might have witnessed in the late 60s at Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, or scenes from Woodstock where hippies were dancing, whirling, twirling, out of control in a way that actually upset a number of adults of that generation, worried at the frenzy of their dance, the frenzy of their music, the freedom they were expressing. That image comes to mind when I think about King David dancing with all of his might, without a care in the world, before his Lord. A bit later in the reading, and 3 months later in the story, it says that David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded in a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of trumpet. Now an ephod is an outer layer of clothing worn as a sign of high priesthood. And it went over the shoulders and included a breastplate. And it hung down below the waist to the knees, but was open at the sides, because it was implied you put it on over other priestly robes. In fact, David got in trouble a few verses later with his wife Michal, who, when he comes back home to his tent on the road, she claims he disgraced himself by disrobing in front of his people publicly. Now, my imagination suggests that what had happened was he was dancing with all his might, got so hot that he took his underrobes off and kept his ephod on as a symbol of his high priesthood and king. But because, of course, it was slit at the sides, maybe the people of Israel got a glimpse of parts of his body that nobody should have seen. He was unsightly in Michal's mind. He was disgracing himself as he was disrobed, as she says. So I imagine such was the passion of David for his God. Such was the love he had for his Lord. Such was his way of celebrating God's presence that he was overheated, whirling and twirling, took off a few layers and kept on going. Such was his love for his God. Our theme today from the New Creed is the line that says, to celebrate God's presence. To celebrate God's presence. That's what King David certainly was doing as he danced God's presence to Jerusalem. I thought I'd continue my recent practice of preaching with this gorgeous stained glass window behind me, because as I was reminded by a congregant earlier this month, this window and stained glass windows like it all over the world are a way of celebrating God's presence in our own sanctuaries, in our church buildings. In fact, often the stained glass is a way of bringing theological ideas, images of God, images of the stories of Jesus, or images of creation right into our worship spaces. So I have this window reminding me that since this church was built in '53, it has helped us celebrate God's presence. Celebrating most often conjures up the idea of Thanksgiving. If somebody said to you, what does it mean to celebrate? What would leap to mind right away is the idea of Thanksgiving. Celebration is a form of Thanksgiving, and that's true. But I also believe that to celebrate deeply involves wonder. It deeply involves a sense of wonder. That reminds me of a different window. I'm standing in front of this one, but there's a window in Seattle in a condominium owned by my friends Bruce and Nancy. And that window I call the window of wonder, because it's a lengthy window about 7 feet tall, and it goes on for about 25 feet along the front of their condominium. And it looks out right over the Ballard Locks. Now, the Ballard Locks are the only way that any ship or leisure craft can get from Union Lake and Lake Washington out to Puget Sound, to the Great Salish Sea. And so every ship can be watched going through the Ballard Locks day in and day out. I call it the window of wonder, because you can sit in their little nook at that window with a cup of coffee. You could take a whole day or two sitting and simply watching the wonder of the locks working, taking tons, hundreds of tons of steel up and down with water flow and moving them out to the ocean. As I sit at the window of wonder, I often think many, many thoughts of wonder and curiosity. Who built the locks? How long did it take? Why, Bruce and I just last year were wondering, I wonder how much water goes through those locks when their gates are fully open. And how do ships float anyway? And do we really understand how a lock works? Bringing water in here, letting water out there, ships go up, ships go down, some are going up while others are going down next to them. Locks are a great place of wonder for me. And this window that looks out on them is a great place of wonder for me. I wondered this year, how is it the indigenous peoples, the Coast Salish peoples who lived around what we call Seattle, got from Union Lake or Lake Washington to the Great Salish Sea before contact? I wonder whether they had to portage, or they had a creek or a river that was working. I haven't done enough research, but I'm happy to sit in the wonder and the dreaming of ancient days. Just a few weeks ago, Deb and I were camping at Rathtrevor Beach Provincial Park. It's a great place, filled with wonder. I have a few pictures for you of it. I was filled with wonder for 5 days, filled with wonder about how tides work. I grew up on the East Coast. I come from a tidal people. And yet I hadn't really sat and watched tides come in and come out. And at different points a day, we found ourselves scrambling 5 minutes down to the beach to see where the water was at now. Was it halfway up? Was it a kilometer out? Or was it very close to shore? I sat in wonder as we camped at watching the fire. I sat in wonder as I watched wood burn in its turn, and then allowing certain pieces of wood to burn and then finally break and fall, making way for more air or more flame here or other logs to burn. Fire is the thing that strikes great wonder in many of us. I watch the birds catching insects. It's incredible to watch small birds fly almost the same patterns as the insects, catching them mid-air. You wonder, are they dizzy? What's going on with those birds? Are they out, their balance out of whack because they're whirling and twirling? You realize they're catching insects and following them on their path. Or babies and toddlers splashing themselves in tidal pools on the beach, filled with wonder and joy as they touch the ocean for the first time in their lives. Or I had a great moment of wonder when I came eye to eye in the dusk with a black-tailed deer. Very close, 4 feet away. kind of spooked me, but I stayed still. It watched me, it kept eating, didn't seem to care. And just the presence of an animal of that size, of course, brought wonder flooding into my heart and into my life. Wonder is such an important part of a faith life. Wonder opens us up. Even the word that accompanies wonder, wow, is a big open word. Wow. It opens our mouth up. Many of the words that come with wonder, all have big mouth actions to them. Wonder is a thing that cracks us open. It reminds us that we are not it. We are not all that there is. We don't have all the answers. It opens us up because it helps us forget ourselves. Wonder helps us forget ourselves, forget our self-centeredness. That there's so much bigger than us, and we are just part of a great, wondrous whole. It opens us up because we become excited or impassioned, or better yet, grateful. Wonder is how we can begin to celebrate God's presence. By strengthening the muscle of wonder in our lives, we learn to celebrate in new ways. We draw our God closer to us through the act of wonder and then celebration. Well, if you've been missing out on wonder lately, I got a few tips of how to begin. How to get wonder back into your lives. It's such a great human activity, a human feeling. First of all, look around. Explore. Go for a walk. Go for a bike ride or a hike. Open your eyes wide. Open your ears and your nose. Listen, touch, see, feel the world around you. Open yourselves up through exploring new places in new ways. And then there's the great action or activity of mindfulness. A famous Buddhist writer and monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, teaches often about the action of mindfulness. An example would be looking at a flower, taking a moment to imagine with wonder what that flower was like when it was a seed, what it was like under the ground as it sprouted, what it was like as it pushed with fierceness through the ground, what it was like as a small stalk without many leaves, and then a stalk with many leaves, a stalk with a bud, and a stalk with a flower in full bloom. This is one simple idea of how mindfulness can bring us to a sense of wonder, develop our sense of curiosity and wonder, and in fact, our celebration of God's presence. It's not rocket science, it's not a fancy theology, but it is a way that we can get rooted in deep faith and in deep celebration. A sense of wonder is an act of discipleship. It's a way to fall open to the world and celebrate God's presence like never before. May it be so. Amen.